founding principles of the Reform Party when Stephen Harper was first elected was a triple E Senate: elected, effective, and equal. Now, the theory there was by having senators voted by citizens to represent the provinces, they would have legitimacy as they were voted, and therefore would be equal to the House of Commons as a genuine expression of democracy. Senators would reflect provincial populations, so Alberta would in fact have 15 senators instead of the 6 they have now, and BC would have 16 senators instead of the 6 they have now, as would reflect the proportion of population in Canada. In 2004, as leader of the newly reminted Conservative Party, Stephen Harper scorned the Senate in opposition. He repudiated its legitimacy, saying, "Despite the fine work of many individual senators, the upper house remains a dumping ground for the favored cronies of the Prime Minister." So did Stephen Harper introduce legislation to change our Constitution to permit the democratization of the Senate, as was advocated by Reform in the 1993, 1997, and 2000 election campaigns, and repeated in the Conservative platform in 2004? Oh dear, quite the opposite. In August 2008, Harper filled 18 vacancies, and in August 2009, 9 more, loading the Senate with 27 partisan Conservatives. Some choices were admirable, for example, TV journalist Pamela Wallin, but others were inexplicable, like appointing former hockey coach Jacques Demers to the Senate. In 2005, Jacques Demers admitted he was functionally illiterate in both official languages. Now, considering senators must wade through exhaustive amounts of text containing complex legal terms and review laws that impact on every Canadian, this is probably the worst possible choice you can make for the Senate, someone who's functionally illiterate. But in his own words, Harper is not looking for competence. He wants total loyalty and fidelity to the contemporary Conservative Party and its agenda, whether they're in government or out. Demers and the other 26 new Tory senators are to toe the party line. Says Harper on August 29, 2009, at the press conference announcing his newest 9 senators, "It is my intention to have senators in there to support the elected government, senators who will stop blocking our significant legislation, our anti-crime legislation, our legislation on democratic reform." Among the new senators were Doug Findlay, Harper's political operations director and husband of Conservative Human Resources Minister Dianne Findlay, and Carol Stewart-Olson, Harper's longtime aide, and former Conservative Party President Don Plett. In both the 2006 and 2008 Conservative Party platforms, Harper promised to create a public appointments commission that would award jobs on merit. In 2006, Harper moved to make such a commission, appointing Conservative Party fundraiser Gwyn Morgan to head it, while the opposition in Parliament objected to a crony of Harper's being appointed to a commission to stop cronyism, and Harper then dropped the commission from his plans. The makeup of the Senate is now 54 Liberals and 50 Conservatives, with 4 senators to retire in 2010. If Harper continues on as Prime Minister, within 18 months the Senate will have a Conservative majority for the first time in 85 years. Now, the saving grace of being an appointed senator for life, until age 75 anyway, is that you can't be fired for speaking, acting, or voting independently. So senators can and often do oppose their party's position in the House of Commons. And that is why, for example, all 9 senators, 6 Liberals and 3 Conservatives, on the 2002 Special Committee on Illegal Drugs all voted to recommend the effective legalization of marijuana, even though that position was not supported by Liberals or Conservatives in the House of Commons. Members of the House of Commons look no further than their current 2 to 4 year term in the Commons to determine the interests of Canadians. So the legislation is big on optics and messaging, but few long-term effects of their legislation are actually considered seriously. Thus, the long-term effects of, say, our military in Afghanistan go unconsidered each year, or the long-term effects of deficit financing, or crime-producing prohibition crime bills, for example, are not seriously considered by the elected politicians in the 4 parties in the House, because all of them are too obsessed with framing ideology for the voters in the next election, usually only 1 to 3 years away. Senators, however, can determine the long-term effects of the same legislation because they'll be in office for 10 to 35 years. That is what the 2002 Special Committee did when they recommended repealing marijuana prohibition. They were looking at what was good for Canada in the long term and not concerned with election campaign optics and how it would be perceived as a matter of being tough or not on crime. Stephen Harper betrayed his commitment to a Triple E Senate, to reforming the Senate, to repudiating partisan patronage, and to addressing the democratic deficit. But in addition, parallel to stacking the Senate with loyal minions of questionable competence, has been Harper's appointment, for example, to the courts of our land. Harper's most recent 5 appointments to the courts are instructive, and they were made September 9th. Peter Richardson Bryson, for example, was appointed to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. I hope he's competent, but he gave $2,750 to the Conservative Party in 2004 and 2006. William Burnett was appointed to the Court of the Queen's Bench. He gave $3,000 to the Conservative Party in 2004 and 2006. Claude Dallaire was appointed to the Quebec Superior Court, and his most recent donation to the Conservative Party was $500 last year. Robert Dewar was appointed to the Court of Queen's Bench in Manitoba, and he gave $250 to the Conservative Party in 2008. And Pierre Blais, the final appointment made that September, was Attorney General in Brian Mulroney's Conservative government and was appointed as Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Appeal. So what's the message here? If you want to be a judge in any court in Canada, open up your wallets and donate to the Conservative Party and start spouting fidelity to the Conservative Party agenda? Is that what we want, running our courts and being appointed? Lifetime appointments? Judges are lifetime appointments until they die. So once again, blatant party patronage is corrupting another institution of our democracy. 3 days before the October 14th federal election, Stephen Harper said, "We're not running a deficit. We have planned a realistic scenario. We've got conservative budget estimates. We've got a modest platform that doesn't fill the existing fiscal room that we have, and we have plenty of flexibility in how we phase it. So that's our policy. We're not getting into deficit." And then Harper added, for further historical irony, this country will not go into recession this next year. So 1 year later, the operating deficit for the government of Canada is an unprecedented $56 billion, with Harper predicting operating deficits for the next 6 fiscal years. Compare that to the average annual operating deficit of the Mulroney Conservatives that Harper condemned when he first ran as a reform candidate in 1993. Brian Mulroney's Conservative Party Tories ran a $284 billion deficit over 9 years, an average of $32 billion short in red ink over a 2-term administration. It was the Chrétien Liberals with Finance Minister Paul Martin that reversed the deficit financing trend, operating with budget surpluses from 1997 to 2005, after 3 deficit terms. That was also used to pay down the national debt. Now, for the interest of everybody out there, the national debt is the accumulation of all the money that you as a taxpayer owe because the government, since the Trudeau era, have been borrowing money and spending more money than they received in taxes. And as of October 24th, 2009, that's yesterday, the total federal government national debt is $495 billion, pretty well $500 billion. And that means, you know what, for every dollar you spend in taxes that you'd get taken away in your paycheck in taxes, 25 cents of every dollar you have to fork out goes to pay the national debt. Not just the national debt, the interest on the national debt. It actually doesn't pay anything on the national debt anymore. So it has been run up by Trudeau, Mulroney, the first 3 years of the Chrétien government, and now Stephen Harper. And Stephen Harper has an economics degree from the University of Calgary, and he was the chief spokesman and president of the National Citizens Coalition from 1998 to 2002 when he took 1 term off from being a member of Parliament. Now, the National Citizens Coalition is a right-wing populist lobby, always have railed against deficit financing, large government, and centralized government. In fact, their first campaign was a Turn and a Pusher program in 1973, the TIP program that has evolved to become our Crime Stoppers that is unfortunately everywhere. Harper, the lobbyist for the National Citizens Coalition, Harper, the neophyte reform member of Parliament in 1993, and Harper, the Prime Minister, in October 2008, railed against deficits, and for good reason. Deficits are a tax on future generations because banks lend government the money to cover these operational budget shortfalls. You know, there's about 24 million Canadians out of a population of 31 million over the age of 17 paying income taxes on their earnings. A $56 billion operating deficit that we're going to see now for this year, for just 1 year, must be borrowed from banks, pension funds, individuals who buy Canada savings bonds, those are the ads you're seeing a lot of on television right now, and or treasury bonds or other financial instruments. This debt is directly payable only by the Canadian taxpayer. So this, $56 billion deficit alone is a $2,350 debt for the average taxpayer, you, in just 1 year of the government operating this deficit of $56 billion. But it's worse than just a delayed tax bill for $2,300 to you. It's a massive delayed tax, but when government borrows money, it sucks that money out of circulation for the use of private enterprise. So businesses that need to borrow for expansion or construction or capitalization or research and development or new machinery or exploration find that the money available for loans is scarce and often unavailable because the Canadian government has borrowed the first $56 billion of available money in just 1 year that would have been available to businesses.